Okay, so today we're going to be going over Declare War on Your Enemies. This is going to be 1.1 of the 33 Strategies of War by Robert Greene. The Polarity Strategy. Life is endless battle and conflict. You cannot fight effectively unless you can identify your enemies. People are subtle and evasive, disguising their intentions, pretending to be on your side. You need clarity. Learn to smoke out your enemies, to spot them by the signs and patterns that reveal hostility. Then, once you have them in your sights, inwardly declare war. As the opposite poles of a magnet create motion, your enemies, i.e., your opposites, can fill you with purpose and direction. As people stand in your way, who represent what you loathe, people to react against, they are a source of energy. Do not be naive. With some enemies, there can be no compromise, no middle ground. There are a lot of people who think that war is barbaric and sometimes we need to get rid of it. I think these people lack a fundamental understanding of nature and how the universe works. War is an intrinsic part of life. Evolution is war. We all fight for resources, for mates, to raise our children, etc. There are more effective ways to do it, and less effective ways to do it, but fundamentally, every action we take is a form of warfare. So I believe that studying warfare and becoming a master of it makes it less likely we will ever have to engage in outright violent conflict. And you can define the difference just over for the presentation. Everything that's just lined up with the left-hand line, this is actually directly from Robert Greene's book, and then any of these bullet points are my own kind of additions to it. So here's the first story, the inner enemy. In the spring, I can't quite remember how to say his name. How to pronounce...
Xenophon.
Xenophon. In the spring of 401 BC, Xenophon, a 30-year-old country gentleman who lived outside Athens, received an intriguing invitation. A friend was recruiting Greek soldiers to fight as mercenaries for Cyrus, brother of the Persian king Artaxerxes. How do we say this again? How to pronounce?
Artaxerxes.
Artaxerxes, brother of the Persian king Artaxerxes, and asked him to go along. The request was somewhat unusual. The Greeks and the Persians had long been bitter enemies. Some 80 years earlier, and in fact, Persia had tried to conquer Greece, but the Greeks, renowned fighters, had begun to offer their services to the highest bidder. Within the Persian Empire, there were rebellious cities that Cyrus wanted to punish. Greek mercenaries would be the perfect reinforcements in his large army. How do we say this again?
Xenophon.
Xenophon. Xenophon was not a soldier. In fact, he had led a coddled life, raising dogs and horses, traveling into Athens to talk philosophy with his good friend Socrates, and living off his inheritance. He wanted adventure, though, and here he had a chance to meet the great Cyrus, learn war, and see Persia. Perhaps, when it was all over, he would write a book. He would go on as a mercenary. He would not go on as a mercenary. He was too wealthy for that, but as a philosopher and a historian. After consulting the oracle at Delphi, he accepted the invitation. Some 10,000 Greek soldiers joined Cyrus's punitive expedition. The mercenaries were a motley crew from all over Greece, there for the money and the adventure. They had a good time of it for a while, but a few months into the job, after leading them deep into Persia, Cyrus admitted his true purpose. He was marching on Babylon, mounting a civil war to unseat his brother and make himself king. Unhappy to be deceived, the Greeks argued and complained, but Cyrus offered them more money, and this quieted them. The armies of Cyrus and
Artaxerxes.
Artaxerxes. Artaxerxes. So it's the armies of Cyrus and Artaxerxes met on the plains of Cunax, not far from Babylon. Early in the battle, Cyrus was killed, putting a quick end to the war. Now the Greeks' position was suddenly precarious. Having fought on the wrong side of a civil war, they were far from home and surrounded by hostile Persians. They were soon told, however, that Artaxerxes had no quarrel with them. His only desire was that they leave Persia as quickly as possible. He even sent them an envoy, the Persian commander Desatheres, to provision them and escort them back to Greece. And so, guided by this commander, the Persian army and the mercenaries began the long trek home, some 1,500 miles. A few days into the march, the Greeks had new fears. Their supplies from the Persians were insufficient, and the route that they were taking was problematic. Could they trust these Persians? They started to argue among themselves. The Greek commander expressed his soldiers' concerns to the general, who was sympathetic. Basically, they were told to bring their captains to a meeting at a neutral site, and the Greeks would voice their grievances, and the two sides would come to an understanding. The Greeks agreed and appeared the next day with his officers at the appointed time and place, where, however, a large contingent of Persians surrounded and arrested them. They were beheaded that same day. One man managed to escape and warned the Greeks of the Persian treachery. That evening, the Greek camp was a desolate place. Some men argued and accused, others slumped drunk to the ground. A few considered flight, but with their leaders dead, they felt doomed. That night, Xenophon, who had stayed mostly on the sidelines during the expedition, had a dream. A lightning bolt from Zeus set fire to his father's house. He woke up in a sweat. It suddenly struck him. Death was staring the Greeks in the face, yet they lay around moaning, despairing, and arguing. The problem was in their heads. Fighting for money rather than for a purpose or cause, unable to distinguish between friend and foe, they had gotten lost. The barrier between them and home was not rivers or mountains or the Persian army, but their own muddied state of mind. Xenophon didn't want to die in this disgraceful way. He was no military man, but he knew philosophy and the way men think, and he believed that if the Greeks concentrated on the enemies who want to kill them, they would become alert and creative. If they focused on the vile treachery of the Persians, they would grow angry, and their anger would motivate them. They had to stop being confused mercenaries and go back to the Greeks, the polar opposite of the faithless Persians. What they needed was clarity and direction. Xenophon decided to be Zeus's lightning bolt, waking the men up and illuminating their way. He called a meeting of all the surviving officers and stated his plan. We will declare war without parley on the Persians. No more thoughts of bargaining or debate. We will waste no more time on argument or accusations among ourselves. Every ounce of our energy will be spent on the Persians. We will be as inventive and as inspired as our ancestors at Marathon, who fought off the vastly larger Persian army. We will burn our wagons, live off the land, move fast. We will not for a second lay down our arms or forget the dangers around us. It is us or them, life or death, good or evil. Should any man try to confuse us with clever talk or vague ideas of appeasement, we will declare him too stupid and cowardly to be on our side, and we will drive him away. Let the Persians make us merciless. We will be consumed with one idea, getting home alive. The officers knew that Xenophon was right. The next day, a Persian officer came to see them, offering to act as an ambassador between them and Artaxerxes. Following Xenophon's counsel, he was quickly and rudely driven away. It was now war and nothing else. Roused to action, the Greeks elected leaders. Xenophon was among them, and began to march home. Forced to depend on their wits, they quickly learned to adapt to the terrain, to avoid battle, and to move at night. They successfully eluded the Persians, beating them to a key mountain pass, moving through it before they could be caught. Although many enemy tribes still lay between them and Greece, the dreaded Persian army was now behind them. It took several years, but almost all of them returned to Greece alive. I think the first mistake that Xenophon made was not vetting his leader. I think that you should be the leader of your own life, and in this example, Xenophon was simply allowing himself to be carried by the tides of life. So it is no wonder that he found himself in a shipwreck situation. There are situations where it makes sense to follow the leadership of others, but you should take time to vet the leader and assure yourself of the competence. And the second piece is that the journey should be actively making you a better person, helping you to attain the goals that you have in your life. Ironically, Xenophon actually did get what he was looking for. He was looking for an adventure. He wanted something worthwhile to write about, and he certainly got both of those. But instead of being a passive observer, the situation required his active involvement and leadership. Xenophon had a solid understanding of his relationship with the God or gods, because at this time it was plural gods. His dream was a message from the gods, and it was a message that he heeded. I believe that this is an extremely important skill to develop and cultivate. Xenophon then took swift and effective action. He was able to save his group of men, and this is extremely commendable. And this is a reading again from Xenophon about this experience. Then Xenophon got up and called together the under officers of Proximus. When they were called together, he said, "Gentlemen, I cannot sleep. I don't think you can, and I don't think you can. I can't lie here when I see the plight that we are in. It is clear that the enemy did not show us open war until they thought they had everything well prepared, and no one among us takes the pains to make the best possible resistance. Yet, if we give way and fall into the king's power, what do you expect our fate will be? When his own half-brother was dead, the man cut off his head and cut off his hand and stuck them on a pole. We have no one to plead for us, and we marched here to make the king a slave or to kill him if we could. And what do you think our fate will be? Would he not go to all extremes of torture to make the whole world afraid of making war on him? Why, you must do anything to keep out of his power. While the truce lasted, I never ceased pitying ourselves. I never ceased congratulating the king and his army. What a vast country I saw, how large, what endless provisions, what crowds of servants, how many sheep, or cattle and sheep, what gold, what ruminant. But when I thought of these soldiers, we had no share in all these good things, unless we bought them, and few had anything left to buy with. And to procure anything without buying was debarred by our oaths. While I reasoned like this, I sometimes fear the truce was more than the war now. However, now they have broken the truce. There is an end to both their insolence and their suspicion. There lie all these good things before us, prizes for which side prove the better man. The gods are the judges of the contest, and they will be with us, naturally. When you have appointed as many commanders as are wanted, assemble all the soldiers and encourage them. That will be just what they want now. Perhaps you have noticed yourselves as crestfallen. Perhaps you've noticed how crestfallen they were when they came into camp, how crestfallen they went on guard. In such a state, I don't know what you could do with them, but if someone could turn their minds from wondering what will happen to them and make them wonder what they could do, they would be much more cheerful. You know, I am sure that not numbers or strength brings victory in war. But whatever army goes into battle stronger in soul, their enemies generally cannot withstand them. So I just want to go back over that and kind of highlight some of the ideas. So basically here, he's bringing together all the generals, the under officers, and telling them about the problem that they're in. And he talks about the king here and how ruthless the king was to basically mutilate his half-brother. And then he kind of talks about how he kind of envied like the land of like how great the Persian land was, but they couldn't take any of these goods of like the cattle and the sheep and all this kind of stuff. All they could do was buy, and they didn't really have any money to buy. And so, but basically now that this truce has been broken, what they can do is they can go through and basically kind of pillage the land and take whatever they can find from whoever is not able to defend themselves, so that they can live off the land in order to make their way through the country. And then he kind of talks about how like emotionally distraught all the men are, but that if we kind of imbue them with a purpose, that they can become creative and resourceful, and that it doesn't matter about the numbers that we have, that just with that purpose, we will basically be able to defeat anybody in war. And it's a very compelling speech. Tough to kind of break down and understand, because this isn't our typical way of language or understanding, but very good. Xenophon was able to logically think through the situation. Artaxerxes was a ruthless leader. He mutilated the body of his dead brother and killed the leader of their army. And he would do the same thing for the rest of them. So they should consider him an absolute enemy and give no quarter. He also had the courage to address the situation and stand up and take charge. He acknowledged his own fears and doubts. This helped everyone who was feeling the same things but didn't want to face them. Then he created a unifying purpose for the Greeks, to do whatever it took to get home. They'd leave behind all the heavy wagons and supplies. They would be nimble, living off the land, and anyone who questioned this path or purpose would be exiled from the group. This is very commendable, and he showed tremendous leadership potential. Here's another quote from the book. Political thought and political instinct prove themselves theoretically and practically in the ability to distinguish friend and enemy. The high points of politics are simultaneously the moments in which the enemy is, in concrete clarity, recognized as the enemy. Carl Schmitt. In the beginning, Xenophon was quite immature and got caught up in a bad situation, but he quickly matured and became much more discerning. This was a massive transformation from a passive observer to a passion-filled leader. And then we go on to Robert Greene's interpretation of the story. Interpretation. Life is battle and struggle. You will constantly find yourself facing bad situations, destructive relationships, and dangerous engagements. How you confront these difficulties will determine your fate. As Xenophon said, your obstacles are not rivers or mountains or other people. Your obstacle is yourself. If you feel lost and confused, if you lose your sense of direction, if you cannot tell the difference between friend and foe, you have only yourself to blame. Think of yourself as always about to go into battle. Everything depends on your frame of mind and how you look at the world. A shift of perspective can transform you from a passive and confused mercenary into a motivated and creative fighter. We are defined by our relationship to other people. As children, we develop an identity by differentiating ourselves from others, even to the point of pushing them away, rejecting them, and rebelling. The more clearly you recognize who you do not want to be, then the clearer your sense of identity and purpose will be. Without a sense of polarity, without an enemy to react against, you are as lost as the Greek mercenaries. Duped by other people's treachery, you hesitate at the fatal moment and descend into whining and argument. Focus on an enemy. It can be someone who blocks your path or sabotages you, whether subtly or obviously. It can be someone who has hurt you or someone who has fought you unfairly. It can be a value or an idea that you loathe, and that you see in an individual or group. It can be an abstraction, stupidity, smugness, vulgar materialism. Do not listen to people who say that the distinction between friend and enemy is primitive and passé. They are just disguising their fear of conflict behind a front of false warmth. They are trying to push you off course, to infect you with the vagueness that inflicts them. Once you feel clear and motivated, you will have space for true friendship and true compromise. Your enemy is the polar star that guides you. Given that direction, you can enter battle. Quote from the Bible: "He that is not with me is against me." Luke 11:23. I have used this strategy of defining my enemy. For me, it was my dad. When I was 18, I got really into personal growth and development. At the time, I was learning about financial freedom and was quite excited about it. I was sharing the concepts with my younger brother, who was quite interested in them. Later that day, my dad took me aside and said that I wasn't to talk about these things with my brother anymore. He wanted my brother to grow up with a strong work ethic and that he was worried these ideas would make him lazy. This hurt me deeply. It became an extreme motivation for myself. It inspired me to learn how to be a great father, how to do a much better job than I felt my own father was doing. It helped me to learn that most people won't support you on your journey of growth and development. So you should be prepared for that and to not take it personally. I've learned to build a very intentional life, one where I'm surrounded by other people who have the same purpose of growth and development. This has been deeply fulfilling. I think that you should look through your own purpose in life and determine who your friends are and who your foes are along this journey. Without this distinction, it's very easy to get yourself tangled up in a rough situation like Xenophon did. Thanks for watching.